Great. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this roundtable. So my name is Heather Hill. I'm the Executive Director for the Chapel in York U.S. Foundation. And joining us today is Ligia Pena, who is the Executive Director of the Chapel in York Canadian Foundation. We are your hosts for this discussion today. We'll be looking at doing fundraising with a global audience. So we don't have a formal speaker queue lined up today. What we're hoping is this can be more of a discussion, collaborative dialogue about what's happening in the world of global fundraising. What are we seeing as challenges? How has how have things shifted over the last 16 months or so? What do we see coming? And other ways that we can share ideas and best practices and both what's working well and what are good adaptations to be implementing during this time. So if it works for everyone, I think what would be great is just to kind of go around. If you want to, you can keep your video off if you'd like, but it'd be nice if everyone could just introduce themselves and say where you're from and maybe a question that you would like to spend some, or discussion point that you'd like to spend some time on today.
And maybe if people can also say which markets they want to fundraise in, it'd be really interesting to see like the regions, because how fundraising is happening in different regions of the world really varies. And so that would give us that a bit of an idea of that. What do you say?
Perfect.
Yeah, cool. Well, do you want me to start by introducing myself?
That'd be terrific.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm very excited to be here. As Heather mentioned, I'm the new executive director of the Chapel in York Canada Foundation. It's really, really new because we just got charitable status about a week and a half ago. So we're in the process of getting things set up. But in my other life and previous lives, I'm a fundraiser. I have 20 years of experience in fundraising, working in small, medium, and large international NGOs. And in the last 5 years, I was the Global Legacy Manager at Greenpeace International. And so what I specialize in now in my consulting, on my other job, which is my consulting business, is international legacies, gifts and wills programs. I'm also doing my PhD on that topic. So having worked in about between 14 and 18 different markets in the past. So I see the whole global perspective of things. So how about I throw it at someone, and I'm going to do like the snowball game of introductions, and I'll throw it to Marissa, who is on my screen in the middle, and if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi. My name is Marissa Castillo. I work for Women's Link Worldwide, and so they're an international NGO, and I'm based in the US, and I just started a few weeks ago, so trying to get more familiar with what it's like to have a global audience, originally coming from a fundraising background, specifically with US donors, and so just trying to get some perspective, and I will pass it over to Tim.
Great. Thanks, Marissa. Well, it's great to meet new people here. I know Jamie from previous stuff. Hey, Jamie, and others. But I'm Tim Wolf. I'm Director of International Development at the University of Minnesota Foundation in Minnesota, US. Been in this position about coming up on 5 years. Our mostly alumni focused on international fundraising, primarily in Asia, which is about 3/4 of our international students and alumni. So I was traveling to Asia about 6-7 times a year. Along with Asia, we have a notable alumni population in Canada. So looking to hear more about what you've got going up north, close by. Interested to hear about that. So given the situation and kind of the lingering effects of not traveling, we're just changing. We just finished a significant university-wide capital campaign, and in June. So now it's kind of a pivot, both with that university and foundation effort, along with just where to go in international as we kind of continue on in this uncertain environment. So, and maybe that may be more, again, looking north. So we'll see. Hopefully that border can open up. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to hearing ideas as things kind of go forward, and appreciate Chapel in York sharing info and setting this up. And with that, I'm going to go to Jamie.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I am also in higher ed, so I am working at Carnegie Mellon University. Previously worked within a political fundraising field and then nonprofit in New York with an international relations focus. And now I'm at Carnegie Mellon. So was traveling domestically for raising money from alums for a few years, and then Tim knows this, right at the start of 2020, switched over to the international development department at Carnegie Mellon. So I have not been able to get on the road internationally for them yet. Looking forward to doing so. I'll be covering various one-off regions, but mostly Singapore, Southeast Asia. And we're actually looking more into Mexico and South America as well. Those are new regions for us. So any tips and tricks you have on that. Also interested, maybe not in this roundtable, but eventually to hear more about your international legacy focus, because we're just told not to even expect any legacy gifts from international folks. So anyway, very happy to be here and interested in hearing more. Oh, I'll pick on you, Darcy.
Thank you, Jamie. It's nice to see everyone and be here today, even if it is virtually. So I'm at University of Virginia, and I'm at the McIntire School of Commerce, which is one of our business schools here. We like to keep it really complicated. You may have heard of Darden also, which is a sister school to us. So I've been here at UVA 15 years focused on our alumni and parents outside of the US. I've been in both engagement and development roles. Just like Tim had mentioned, that they just wrapped up a capital campaign. We are in the middle of a capital campaign right now for the university, and for McIntire in particular, we are in a building campaign as part of that for McIntire. And so that's been a focus of ours over the last couple of years. In terms of the areas that I focus in, pre-COVID, I spent a lot of time in Asia, and particularly East Asia, and then also in South Asia and India as well. Quite a bit of time in Europe, in the UK as well. But I think that kind of wraps up a little bit about me, and I'm just eager to hear what people are, what people are thinking about for the future, right? I mean, we're obviously in a time of, is travel starting or not starting, and to hear the refocus that people are working on, that's interesting. Thank you. Let's throw it over to, I need to go off my screen here. How about Fanny, or Franny? I'm sorry, Franny. Or did she have a message in the chat? There's Franny.
Hi, everyone.
I'm having trouble hearing Franny. I don't know if other people are.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Franny.
You're unmuted, but your sound is really low.
How is that?
There we go.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
There we go. So let's try again. I'm Franny McGill. I'm a fundraiser with Canopy, which is a small environmental international NGO based in Vancouver, Canada. And I'm actually here on behalf of my colleague, who is more focused on major donors and other streams of revenue. My focus has always been on foundations and grants. And I am just excited. I'm excited to get these perspectives, and also specifically interested in learning about how to continue meeting kind of new prospects remotely while travel is still not an option, because that's definitely been a little bit of a struggle for us over the last year and a half. And I'd say that our audiences are right now, our areas of focus for expansion are the UK and actually the US. So thanks.
Great. And then,
Oh, and I have to pass it along. Let's see who has not.
Rebecca has the last one.
Okay, there we go.
Hello, I've got a very different accent to everyone else, which is quite nice. So I'm based in the UK, and I work for 3 of Bath's leading cultural attractions in the Southwest. So one is the Roman Baths, which is very popular, particularly with US and Chinese citizens before the pandemic, obviously slightly different now. But I'm here because the Fashion Museum, one of the world's greatest collection of fashionable and historic dress, needs to move home. It's no mean feat, it's 100,000 objects. We have quite a lot of friends in New York particular who love us, lots of big following, lots of interest already from potential US donors, but we've never done seeking donations from the US before. So I'm just really here just to listen to other people, listening about your experience of kind of cross-border fundraising, and say hello.
great. Well, thank you, everyone. And I realized I didn't really give you much of an introduction about myself, aside from what I'm currently doing, but I've spent over 20 years in the charitable sector, working with INGOs, higher education, doing a fair amount of consulting and speaking as well on an international space. So it's been interesting seeing across the different regions of the globe where things, where we have best practices that are consistent and where you have very different contextual nuances and how you engage different audiences. And I think that's probably one of the most critical things to know when you're doing global fundraising. And I think especially with the pandemic now, understanding what the context is for different regions. If you're US based, you're seeing things reopen, some things starting to normalize, travel coming back, which is not the case for a lot of other countries. So if you're fundraising in those, being aware of what's happening and what's possible and what's not, even in how you're framing messaging and what expectations might be of donors at any given time. But Ligia, I know, was just in the Latin American roundtable, and we had some interest in that region. So I'd be curious to know, Ligia, if there's anything that came up in that might be helpful for the group, both specific to that market, as well as kind of things that are more universally applicable.
Mm-hmm. It was really interesting, and it was fun because it was the first Spanish language roundtable that Chapel New York has. But so the most important thing is to understand that it's a region. It's not a market, right? It's a lot of different markets. It's over 30 different markets that are all a different development of its philanthropic culture. So as an institution, if you are looking at developing in the region, you need to be very aware of the the differences from one country to the next. I'm from Argentina. I grew up in Canada. The Argentinian market is significantly different than the Mexican one, than the Brazilian one. So understanding those intricacies is really important. And a book I often reference when it comes to doing international work is The Culture Map. I'm not at home, so normally I would just show it to you on the screen, but I'm on vacation this week, apparently. So what was really interesting that came out of this conversation just an hour ago is, and my biggest observation as being someone that lives in Canada and has been monitoring a bit how COVID-19 has impacted fundraising, and what, the observations is that a lot of the challenges that we encountered in the global north, for lack of a better term, are very similar from a fundraising perspective to what they've encountered in the global south. The difference is, however, is that the discrepancy between within the society, between the rich and the poor, there's not really a middle class per se, like we do in the global north. And that's where the majority of our donors sit as North American, European organizations. The majority of our donors are middle you to high net worth individuals, and in some cases, ultra high net worth. But in South America, in Latin America, you only have the ultra rich, and they're having difficulty normalizing the small gifts, the small, $10 a year gift or $10 a month gift. So that's the biggest thing. So they saw a lot of the similar things is, from one day to the next, their face-to-face programs for those who are INGOs, especially, were shut down. So reshifting priorities to digital priorities. And so that created an entire big push, much like what we saw in the global north. But what they also saw is an increase in commitments from high net worth individuals, from corporations and foundations, a lot of the same causes that we also saw: mental health, increased technology, access to technology for more remote communities. I don't know if this has been a huge topic of conversation in the US or in the UK, but in Canada it definitely has been. Remote learning, etc. So a lot of that, and also adapting education systems to be safer for the return to school, etc. So, but honestly, what they've observed as well, and what they highlighted, was the fact that for a lot of organizations, much like the global north, 2020 was probably one of their best fundraising year, but only for those organizations that really understood the importance of donor stewardship and cultivation. And so that was a big chasm that happened in the sector, in the region, is organization needing to realize and understand the importance of stewardship and cultivation of donors. And it really always comes down to that. I mean, so I could go on, but I also don't want to take up the entire conversation. So I'll throw it back at you.
Sure. One thing I would note as well, and I think this especially gets into what Rebecca raised, is that I think and the pandemic helped raise more of a global awareness about what's happening other places and where needs are, rather than just in our own backyard. And I think it's been a growth year in many ways for international fundraising, especially for Rebecca. As you're looking to the US, I think there were a lot more US donors aware of what was happening in other places and other causes, and thinking beyond their own country and wanting to give other places, which, not to speak ill of our US donors, but sometimes they can be very country centric in how they think about their giving, and they're thinking about things they can see, things they could, that are more tangible, and not necessarily thinking of the larger causes, aside from some INGO like International Relief when there's a disaster or something, but on a regular basis, unless it was right in front of them, not so much. But I think the pandemic really helped kind of raise a greater awareness and knowledge and informed perspective about what was happening in different regions. So I do think it's a good time for those outside the US to be looking to US donors to make a gift. And I think the same goes for those of us who are based in North America, to ask our donors to be, who are based in other countries, to be giving as well. Again, as Ligia said, I think cultivation and stewardship are really critical right now. Again, as we're experiencing different states of reopening, or in some cases returning to lockdown, depending on where you are in the world, and being mindful of leading with empathy in our messaging right now. And I think that's where the organizations who've seen success have really kind of openly acknowledged that it may not be the best time, it may not be an easy time for the donors, but letting them know that they're thought of, that they're cared about, and not making that first contact or every contact and ask, but it's also peppering that with cultivation, with stewardship, with acknowledgement about the environment, as well as just the gratitude for their past support. And I think as far as looking at new markets, it's the same way in looking at those new perspective, kind of understanding the context in which they might be operating, and leading with that rather than leading with here's my elevator speech about what my organization does and why you should want to be involved with it, but first kind of contextualizing to the current space we're in, and then finding those affinities where they might have an interest in supporting your mission. I think higher education is especially interesting when you have alumni who have that kind of established relationship because of their educational experience that they had with you. I know in my experience in higher ed, we had international chapters at different states of robustness, depending on who the volunteers were who were involved in leading those. And it was interesting because at the time we had, much like Tim and Jamie have, team members who are focused on those international spaces and getting there, traveling regularly and having events and doing that kind of face-to-face engagement, and being a physical presence in front of that alumni base. And I'd be curious to hear both Tim, because you've had the before and after kind of experience in your role at University of Minnesota, but Jamie, you've only come into the international role when you couldn't travel. So kind of hearing, Tim, your perspective on how you were working before versus how you've adapted and what you've learned as far as what's worked and what hasn't. And Jamie, I'd be very curious to hear how, as you're coming into your role, how you've been able to build relationships with that audience coming in new and trying to establish that relationship, or rather continue it on.
Thanks. Thanks, Heather. Do you want me to go? Well, it's a lot to go through there, but I think the basics, is similar to starting any program. For me, it just felt like starting with a focus on international. We at Minnesota, had the other contact, but we'd never really had a focused, in-person development angle on that. We had the chapters and some engagement and sending lots of emails and stuff, and intermittent university travel to engage, again, primarily Asia, China being our largest market. And so I was just diving in to start to build, who are the people to start meeting, build a portfolio, engage that, while also partnering across our large public university in terms of being a helpful partner in tailoring our engagement to international and continuing to try and do that. So as my travel ramped up, I was making contacts, cultivating, was able to start to move some gift discussions, which takes a little longer when you're traveling halfway around the world, obviously. And so trying to deal with that and then go as a one-person shop. I'm a big team of one, as in terms of full time. So it's a lot to cover the globe, but decided we should focus on Asia. So along with China, started to do a few trips to Singapore, Korea, Japan, and then got hit with January 20 last trip, leaving China in the middle of January and going, things are changing, and here we are, a year and a half later. So just trying to then shift to continuing as best possible those gift conversations with major gift donors, continuing to make contacts, to build networks. As we know, in higher ed, you cycle every year, new alumni engagement, and try and build off that in the virtual space, partner with colleagues to do those virtual events for cultivation and stewardship, and see what we can do. But then now, again, kind of finding that, you know, along with just the pandemic side of it, there are some other maybe political aspects to our focused engagement. You know, to be frank, we were exploring engaging Chapel in York's Hong Kong Foundation up through earlier in the year, and decided that, given what was happening, to pause that effort, because we're just not sure, you know, about that investment with Hong Kong right now. So, yeah, but then, hey, Canada pops up, right? Right, Legit. So we'll see. I think it's there just continue to be tons of opportunity. I think, Heather, to your point, you know, I think at least alumni donors are a bit geographic center. You know, even, you know, our alumni donors, yeah, they're great about, you know, wanting to know what's happening and whatever, but they also care about how it impacts them locally. You know, in Asia, you know, what's the university doing for me where I live and work now, even though I'm not necessarily in Minnesota? You know, how am I relevant to alumni, you know, in their location? So I think that matters, and it's something we need to continue to work at better. And again, just evolving to try and be a good partner across a very large institution while trying to raise some money. So long-winded, but you know, we talked to other higher ed colleagues and others in this space, and we all kind of feel a collective pain and kind of movement of how we, you know, can continue to do this. But again, the forums like this are appreciated to share. So hopefully that kind of answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Jamie, I'd be curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, a lot of fun going on over here. It was not the ideal situation to move into the international realm and not be able to be face to face with my new prospect pool. That being said, I made the most of it. We're lucky here that we have one person in alumni relations dedicated to international. So they were immediately cranking out webinars, trying to get, you know, to the chapter leaders. And some of our chapters, as you know, and mentioned, are better than others. And they were doing their own webinars, their own kind of virtual gatherings. So that was helpful for sure, that I could kind of peek in on that, introduce myself on some of those, to get my face out there. I was surprisingly able to get a lot of virtual visits. So I just kind of cranked through my prospect pool and, you know, weeded in and out and really worked on my pool this year, past year and a half. Was able to get a lot of visits, lots of qualifications, and close some gifts, surprisingly. And so it wasn't so bad, although, you know, expecting much more after kind of getting on the road and being able to cultivate the relationships on the ground. I would say the other interesting thing that it did was, when I took the role, I was told that I would be covering India, Singapore, and Southeast Asia. And when we realized we wouldn't be able to travel for a year plus, I was able to kind of go into those regions, like Darcy was saying on the chat. Like, there was no regional boundaries for me then. And I was picking up those people in, you know, Dubai and Turkey and, you know, like I said, Mexico, Brazil, Canada, even, that maybe we don't have somebody traveling to all that much. And now I'll be going there when borders open up. So my regions have changed because I wasn't able to travel. And I'm kind of happy about that. Because we all know India is a huge nut to crack. So I would love some guidance there if anyone has it. But yeah, I would say that was kind of my experience. I think virtual meetings will always exist in perpetuity now. I think everybody agrees, especially the alumni, that it's easy to do an intro meeting virtually before even getting to a visit, or even knowing the alum already and then following up with them virtually is going to be okay, I think, or more normal to do now in this world. And then again, to Tim's point, kind of assessing as we are able to get back on the road, what is the geopolitical landscape looking like in certain countries? What's the COVID situation? And then putting our travel plans together, after we assess that. So that was kind of my experience so far.
Yeah, and I think, Jamie, to your point and to what Darcy had said as well, often for traveling internationally, we try to go to regions where we have the greatest cluster of people to see. And those who are kind of the outliers or on the outskirts or in the harder to get to places, we just don't always have the luxury of time or funding to be able to get to go see everyone. But by working in the virtual space, you really can form connections with a larger audience to those places where you might not have had that opportunity before. And I think
just to add to that, I would just add, not only was it great for us, for the alum to hear from us, but it also convinced leadership to kind of be a little bit more open-minded about, letting us do those one-off trips. They feel a lot more comfortable now that I have reinvigorated some of the alumni and they're actually talking money. Oh, okay, maybe we can spend a trip there, you know what I mean? So it was helpful.
Great. Just before I get too far in, I keep meaning to welcome Kate, who I saw joined, and we were kind of mid-conversation, but thank you, Kate, for joining us. If there's anything that you'd like to say, or if there's a particular piece of global fundraising you'd like to hear about in the discussion, or a specific market or region you're interested in, please feel free to pop in and say so. And just another point of order, we are recording the roundtable, so it'll be sent to everyone who's registered after. So if there's something that you were taking notes and missed a word or two and you want to go back and review, you'll have the opportunity. And those who registered but weren't able to join will be able to hear the conversation after. So just wanted to make sure I shared that. One other thing I noted too, with Darcy mentioned events and virtual events. I think as there are a lot of organizations who really come to be reliant on events as a revenue source, whether that's an annual event or that's typically how they would engage if they were traveling to other markets as a way to just bring people together. But I think those who have done it know that it's a lot of direct and indirect costs involved in that. Events can be very expensive to put on, as well as the time that goes into the planning, the organization, number of moving parts with those that have to be managed. But I think the virtual events kind of take that piece out. There's still the time that's needed to plan them. You want to do them well, but you don't have that additional layer of cost of renting the venue and having the catering and that whole experience. But I've seen some very creative ways of doing virtual events in this last time frame. That not only does it become a more efficient way for organizations to connect with their supporters, but also provides a platform to bring in more supporters who normally wouldn't be able to physically attend those events, regardless of whether they were in person or not. So I think we've seen a lot of silver linings, as Darcy said, through using technology. And one comment I've made and some of the other roundtables we've had on this is, we weren't using virtual tools for donors, especially major donors, a lot, because I think it's not what we're used to doing, but also there was kind of the assumption on our parts as well that that's how the donors preferred to be engaged, that they wanted us there in front of them. But I think what we've found as well is that donors are open to being contacted in a variety of ways, and they're okay if we can't be there in front of them and buy them that cup of coffee or take them out to dinner or whatever. That virtual conversations can be just as meaningful and engaging. It's really up to us as the fundraisers and how those are managed, what the conversations are like versus the channel that they take place in.
So sorry, I wanted to start speaking and then the words didn't come to me. So something that I wanted to also, I guess, address, especially when thinking of how do you figure this out in different markets? And this is something that in the previous roundtable was brought up, but also I read through a lot of articles that are writing. I subscribe to a lot of blogs and newsletters from different parts of the world. And interestingly, a lot of the same themes or interests that we've seen Canada, the US, and UK have been replicated, are the same in other countries. A lot of donors are really concerned with, obviously, supporting healthcare or health-related subjects, mental health, another area, technology, but more importantly as well is environment. I think something that has perhaps really been a bit of a surprise coming out of the pandemic was the environmental impact of everything of our lives. And I'm saying this because I'm thinking of you, Franny, and Kate, who come from an environmental organization, is something to consider as well of how you can frame what you do through that lens so that it appeals to your donors both in Canada and elsewhere, wherever you have your donors. And even from, for both universities, for both of you who are here on the call, is, looking at your alumni through that lens of the kinds of things that your researchers or your students are studying, or things like that are related to those themes, because those are really top of mind in donors everywhere. And of course, then it can look a little bit different from one market to the next. But I think those are going to be things that we need to be really mindful of for the next year or two, and perhaps even longer, because donors are concerned about these things. Marisa, I can't remember the name. I remember the name of the organization, but what it does exactly, because I wanted to frame it in that sense as well.
So we use law to promote social change, particularly around women's rights. So that might look like taking cases to court for litigation or things along that line. And I'm their development officer. And so we've never had someone focused on individual giving before, and that's going to be my role. So this has been really helpful to help me build the framework that I need to be able to implement that project, especially hearing all of you talk about what it's like to hold relationships from where you're based and where your donors are based, because I think that's, for me, going to be a really big challenge, working with donors perhaps in Madrid while I'm based in the US, and getting that cultural context.
Thanks for joining us, Darcy. Jamie, you were interested in legacies and how that's going to affect in the future. It's surprising that someone would say that not to focus on legacies, because OMG, it's really a huge, it's vital to every organization. Of course, I'm being completely biased, so I'm being very honest with my bias on this, but it's inevitable that all organizations need to consider legacies as an important fundraising channel to raise money from, and in order to have not only to be included in your donor's estate, but also it enhances the relationship when you're having a conversation with a mid-level donor or a major level donor, to also have a blended gift approach and having that conversation with them. Because from the research and from experience, the majority of legacy donors are donors who have given in the past very small amounts. It's not the high net worth individual next door. It's not to say that they're not, but I mean, the majority, research has always demonstrated that it's those donors that are really committed, those monthly donors, those that always come to your events and always give on an annual basis, that are really, really committed. Those are your prospects. And so to not want to engage in those conversations is basically telling the donor, no, we don't need your legacy, give it to someone else, right? And oftentimes when management makes comments like this, it comes from a place of personal fear, not necessarily from a strategic perspective. They might have hangups about talking about death, which, legacy is never about death anyway. It's about how people lived. It may be because they're uncomfortable with the idea of that kind of conversation, because perhaps they haven't even had that thought process in their own life. They probably haven't even written their will. So there's a lot of that unknown that needs to be unpacked so that management can say, okay, yes, let's develop a strategy. It's incredibly important. And so it's not because someone lives in a different country that it means you can't have that conversation.
Yeah, I guess I would be interested to hear kind of, because obviously within the US, we're very comfortable with asking for estate gifts. That's definitely the thought of blended gifts, and that's all kosher. But as far as other countries or other regions, what cultures are most comfortable with talking about this? Because it's just a new concept that I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, from my observation, the UK is where gifts and wills are the most normalized. Yes. Rebecca's like, yeah, they have honestly the most amazing national legacy campaign. Remember charity? Stellar. So that's actually the topic of my PhD dissertation. It's a comparative analysis of national legacy marketing campaigns. Those leave a legacy, like the equivalent in the US to leave a legacy in Canada, it's called Willpower. So it's a comparative analysis between the UK, Canada, and Australia. So UK is the most normalized. Yes, in the US, it is quite known, yet it doesn't raise that much. By volume, legacies only plan gifts. So that includes all other plan giving vehicles, only represents 9% of what is raised in the US. Only 9%, whereas in the UK, if memory serves me right, it represents 16% of all funds raised. So as an American, you should be outraged that it's only 9%, considering the wealth and also how normalized it is to include gifts and wills, right? And I think I would attribute that to the fact that there's no national strategy for promoting gifts and wills in the US. In Canada, only 5%. So we've got a long way to go. And that's because our previous Leave a Legacy campaign was left to regional volunteers. And so there was no national strategy. And you really do need a national strategy. Other markets that have very well developed legacy concepts is Australia as well. And the Netherlands as well. Netherlands is really strong, despite the fact that it's a teeny tiny country. It raises a lot of money through gifts and wills. The Nordic countries are up and coming. They're scratching their way into it. I gave a legacy masterclass there at their national fundraising conference a few years back, and they were just like, we want more, we need to do this more. So other markets, Germany is a huge market as well, really huge market, but not nearly as developed as other European countries. So interestingly, go ahead, Tim.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I guess hearing what you're saying, I guess I was curious about domestic, and Jamie, I'm glad you raised this. Curious about donors putting in their plans. Is it domestic giving versus, gifts designated cross-border gifts. I think what comes to mind is you can have success with like expats. For us as Americans, an expat who does, is still a US taxpayer may have benefits by, doing their estate planning back to their alma mater in the US. But for an international student who goes back to what, their country, and again, try to say that nicely, but to do an estate gift or a planned gift back to a US institution, I guess would be kind of where the question, one of the questions that comes to mind. And then also just, I saw something with Canada having like a planned giving, professional association that, if you're familiar with that, I'm talking to our planned giving team about kind of the next year's strategy. And I raised Canada, seeing that Chapel New York was creating the foundation that you mentioned, and then thinking about planned gifts and just how we could potentially try and make all that work, where a Canadian would put Minnesota in their plan, but that would be a cross-border gift, down the line, and how does that work? Or how do we market that? So throwing a lot out there, but just curious.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, it has to be. There's always, although we know that donors don't make a donation, whether it's outright cash or a legacy, because of the tax advantages. But of course, it has some implications. And so this is where, actually, I was answering a question to the ED of the UK Chapel New York Foundation just earlier this week about a donor in the UK that wants to leave a legacy to an organization in the US. So, whether it's Chapel New York or another entity, then they would have to do it through that local entity that has charitable status, so that their estate can get whatever tax benefit as it pertains to that market, keeping in mind that in a lot of markets, there's no tax incentives for any donations. There's still a lot of markets that don't have any tax incentives for donors. So that's where you see sometimes that the fundraising market doesn't evolve as much or as quickly as other markets that do. But yeah, so there would need to be that requirement. And so the wording would have to be very specific so that there's no confusion, and it reduces the possibility that it could be contested by surviving family members and other beneficiaries. So yeah, so in Canada, we will enable that for you. Sorry.
No, that's great. That is great. And maybe there'll be another offline chat there, Lydia, but that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, and I just worked with University of Melbourne, who had a donor who wanted to leave, who was in the US and wanted to leave a legacy gift to them. So we have wording to use that it goes to their fund at the US Foundation. So that way the donor gets the tax benefit of it, or the donor's legacy gets the tax benefit of it. But it's very clear as to, it's not the foundation that receives the funds, but it's the fund within the foundation that's then distributed out to the university. So that it's very clear separation of what the intended beneficiary, who the intended beneficiary is. So there are ways to do that. One thing I just wanted to touch on is we're getting close on time here, but I think especially with legacies, but even thinking that broader question of, if it's not the place where you live, why would you want to give there? How is it relevant to you, whether that's for a legacy gift or whether that's for any gift at all, as you're reaching out to new markets. And I think that one big takeaway I've seen over the last year and a half is we try to talk about our impact a lot during normal times, but I think it's been especially critical in these recent times to talk about what does a gift actually do. I think there has been an increased need globally in the philanthropic sector for great missions doing great work, who have all been affected by the economic shifts that the pandemic brought on. So think of how you're telling your story and how you can make that a very tangible thing for a donor. So whether that's historic collection of fashion needs a new home. Why is that needed? And what's the benefit for kind of the future generations that that's preserved? Or if you're working on women's rights or gender rights that vary greatly from country to country or region to region even, what are the universal impacts of that work that regardless of where you're located, you can appreciate what that mission means? Or if you're an environmental or climate focused organization, you know, what's tangible change that you're working on that, again, is not regional specific, but something that everyone can appreciate? You know, how does this affect everyone, including you, donor? And this is why you should care about it. But I've seen a lot of organizations doing, rather than just an annual report, which is often more of a token document, depending on your organization and how well you do it. But in some cases, just as automatic, it's sent out, no one really looks at it. But doing kind of mini impact reports, not just at year end, but quarterly or biannually, to kind of show, you know, this is what's happened, this is what you've made possible, and giving some very concrete examples of what impact really has looked like. I keep saying impact. I don't like that word. I think it's overused, but to be able to show the actual results of gifts. What have gifts helped produce? What has a donor support done? How can that donor look at their giving and see a result that they can feel good about? So it's another way to both steward the donors, but also cultivation, that they're being encouraged, that they feel like they're not just, you know, a very small drop in a very large ocean of work that needs to be done, but they are actually causing a ripple that's shifting things, that's making a difference. So I think, again, communicating back what a gift has done, or in the case of prospective donors, what their gift could do, using examples of things that have happened recently, are especially important right now. As I think we're already in a crowded, competitive space, but I think especially as we've all universally been affected over the last year by the pandemic, really even more important to kind of distinguish what you're doing that's different from organizations and how donors are making that work possible. Any other, as we've got 5 minutes, but are there any questions or things that we haven't got to yet that anyone would like to raise before we wrap up? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I don't want to shorten the conversation, but I also don't know that we want to jump into a new topic with 4 minutes to go. But I thank you all.
The hour went by fast.
It did. It really did. I think we've covered a pretty wide range as well. It's great to be able to get into legacy. That's not often something that comes up in international conversations, but it should, because as Ligia said, it does happen outside the US, and it is a conversation that should be taking place with donors in a variety of locations. There are ways to make that work for tax benefits or just in general. But we're happy to have had you on the Zoom call. We'll be having these roundtables once a month. We also have our large conference event called IFAB, which is International Fundraising, and that's coming up in November. And we'd love to have you join on that as well. We'll cover a variety of both fundraising topics as well as subsector specific, so education and culture and environmental and all types of and human rights, social work, kind of running the gamut, but really trying to make sure that we're being very context specific so that we'll be able to provide relevant, timely information to you and the work that you're doing. So that's the case for both our roundtables as well as the as IFAB itself. So I hope that you'll join us. If you signed up for this, you'll be getting the emails letting you know when those are. But really, I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you all for being active participants. That's really what makes this successful. And if you have any questions or want to follow up on anything, please feel free to reach out to Ligia. You can reach out to me. We're happy to be a resource to you for any questions or discussion that you'd like to continue.
Thank you, everybody, and good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you all.